This one's for the disruptors, the uncommon, the unconventional, the rebels. You're not here to take things lying down. Well, season 2 is about shaking things up. I'm Beatrice, and this is the Art of Branding podcast. Be ready. Be badass. Let's shake some shit up. Heck yeah, we've got Francisco, who's been telling stories in front of audiences for a decade on today. And he's a keynote speaker, podcast host, and storytelling coach, trusted by the likes of PepsiCo, HP, the UN. You're a national champion. And you stick out on LinkedIn like a sore thumb. Maybe it's all the red. It's all the red. Or it's the become more interesting than Netflix. Has it always been like this?
That I've stuck out at LinkedIn like a sore thumb. The red branding, the headline. Which one are you asking?
Yeah, all of it. Like, tell me more. How did this all become like just being famous from the get-go?
Famous is a term that can be interpreted in many different ways. So when I started on LinkedIn, I didn't have almost any of those things. I had a standard photo. I didn't have that headline. And I think I probably was telling stories right from the beginning. But what happened was I I needed to start I was going to start a website because I was sort of launching myself as a keynote speaker. And this was COVID. So I was sorely lacking pictures of me on a stage speaking, apart from very old things. And I'm like, oh, I need some picture there. I can't just like have stock footage. That is just lame. And then because I'm a bit of a superhero nerd, and I had started trying to come up with some sort of brand that had the word story or storytelling in it, I came up with this whole story powers thing. And then I was thinking, maybe if I could get something that was kind of like superhero themed, like a cartoon of me, then maybe I don't need to actually have a picture of myself on stage. So I tried doing that online with some filters and stuff, looked awful. And I spoke to a friend of mine who's a great illustrator, and he said, sure, I'm happy to do it. It's not too hard, but I need a picture of you speaking so I can use it as a basis. And I was like, I can't do that now because it's COVID. And it's like, no, just any picture, you pretending to speak. So I went outside on my terrace and I told my then 4-year-old the Three Little Pigs story. And no, Little Red Riding Hood. So I told her Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm like really telling it, like giving it my all. And then one of those pictures of me kind of going like this, like mid sentence, ended up being the basis for the illustration, the superhero theme with the red background that became the front page of my website, and it's also what I use as my LinkedIn profile. And the podcast. I have a podcast as well. So that became the branding for everything. And the Become More Interesting Than Netflix, which I use as a headline, came out of a conversation with James Lorraine, who was doing a lot of copywriting at the time, was kind of pretty big on LinkedIn. And we were talking about LinkedIn headlines and how a lot of people don't know what they're doing with them. And we're talking about like, should we do the I help this type of people with this thing, which is now kind of boring. And I think at the time I was saying something like, tell the story and grow your business or something. And it's like, oh yeah, that works. It explains exactly what you do without being completely boring. And I was like, yeah, no, if I wanted to be a bit more exciting, maybe I could say something like, I don't know, become more interesting than Netflix. And it's like, I like that. That's really good. Maybe you should use that. And I'm like, maybe it's a bit of a tall order. Maybe I should say become more interesting than Hulu. Uh, that was the conversation, and then I tried it, and ever since I've been getting people telling me, "Oh, I really love that headline. The headline is what drew me." I still wonder if it's not too fancy for what it's trying to do, but it seems to be so popular that I've never changed it.
So when people are approaching their profile pictures, etc., it's not really about, hey, I need to get this professional shot down. Like, as long as you have the right editing, right? That's more important. And the perspective.
I think it needs to work for the brand. And you know about this a lot more than I do because I'm not a brand guy. But when I had a whole bunch of like very amateurish pictures as for my website, apart from the super cool illustration. And then once I actually I could go outside and I got some professionally done pictures. For some things, those make a huge difference. Right? By professional, I just mean someone who knows how to use a camera and me wearing what I would normally wear if I'm in a speaking gig, other than my wife taking a picture of me outside. That worked, but then again, I sell myself as a speaker and as a trainer to corporate. Now, so for me, that type of picture works, but if you're a coach, if you're doing a whole bunch of other things, maybe there's no call for you to ever have a professionally done picture, particularly wearing a suit or something.
Absolutely. And this is the thing, like, you know, you're speaking about the speaking side, and okay, I've got to get this off my chest. So the other day, I was talking to a friend on LinkedIn, and she was like, I wish I had that confidence and flow that you show in your videos. I was like, before February of last year, I had never done one. And I didn't even think I was good at it. So you talk about this a lot and that you always love speaking. But what are your thoughts on people that are curious out there in whatever way and consider that they don't have that it factor?
I don't think I ever said that I was always good at it. I like doing it. I never had, perhaps it was just lack of self-awareness, right? I never had this thing of like, oh, what are people gonna think? Am I gonna, it's like I always had something I thought was interesting to say, focus, emphasis on the thought. And I was like, I want to talk, right? Like, if it has to be in front of people, then it will be in front of people. So again, I can't claim credit because it wasn't, that part wasn't something I worked on. I worked on becoming better at it. I didn't work on like getting over some sort of major fear of doing it. But when it comes to becoming better at it, the major thing I tend to think when it comes to people doing it on video is when you have to get over how awkward it is seeing yourself on video, because if you do it and never look at it, for a lot of people that already gets rid of a lot of the problems, because if you look at it, it takes a very long time to get used to seeing yourself on video, to get used to listening to what your voice actually sounds like. Same thing goes for podcasting. But if you're not judging it that much, my advice to most people is like, talk about something you actually know. Don't try to come up with some fancy script or whatever. And if you can at all, talk about it in the shape of a story, or at the very least an example. Right, so what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about this work I did with this particular company or client. Okay, just tell me what happened. And you go, so 3 weeks ago, Beatrice came up to me and she was struggling with this thing. And I asked her this and I asked her that. And she said this and she said that. And then we started working on this other thing. And what happened was this, and that. And that's why now she's doing this, and that. That's just a real life example. And you're using that to make your point. If it actually happened and you know what happened, you should be able to tell that in a minute or two on a video. Shouldn't be the hardest thing in the world, right? Maybe you don't even need to edit it. You just say it. Sometimes you jumble some words. That's fine. You can cut that in editing if you really have to. But that's a lot easier than doing what most people try to do, which is some fancy video with effects, with a script you have to memorize. Like, just tell me about something that happened in real life. And if you're talking about stuff you know, you come across more confident. And for a lot of people that I speak to or that I try to coach, that is the main problem. They're trying to talk about things they don't know or in a shape they never said before. They never share those things in that shape, and now they're trying to do it, and it feels unnatural, and they don't feel confident and they feel resistant to do it. So talk about stuff you know in a way you would normally tell someone else about it, and just happen to catch it on video. That seems to be the easiest way for most people, at least when it comes to doing it on video.
The thing I found sometimes when I'm doing it, I think, oh, you know, that conversation was a bit boring. Like it wasn't enough, entertaining enough for my audience. Have you found that with people that you're speaking to?
I thought you were going to say, have you thought about a video you've done? And I'm like, nope, my videos are never boring. I always think I'm the most interesting person in the world. Yes, there are conversations that are not the most exciting conversations ever. I think it is true that some people could do with being more dynamic with the way they speak. Anyone paying half attention to to the way I'm speaking, I change my pitch. I get faster. I get slower. I go, and then I come to that. So there's dynamics to the way I speak. For most people, the problem is that they start talking about theories and generalizations and opinions, and then it takes a lot more to make those exciting. Whereas if you talk about things that have actually happened, our brains are built to pay attention to stories and to find them more engaging. So why put all the onus on having to become interesting on you and the way you speak, other than just tell something that sounds like a story if it's not an actual story, and then half of the interest is already built in. Lots of people are boring, but I posit that the way to make them less boring is not to spend months working with a speaking coach so they can make boring things sound exciting. Is just talk about things that are naturally more exciting, either because they are super exciting or because they're in the shape of something exciting. In this case, a story.
Oh, damn. So there's a story behind the soap bar. I've seen it every time, and I keep on meaning to ask about the soap bar for your newsletter. When it first came out, I was like, okay, so this is like an AI design, like of promoting it. It's red. Okay, so it's on brand in that color, but it's a soap bar.
Well, do you mean a story other than the clear, sort of not plagiarized, but the clear play I'm making on a movie that is super famous to people that are of a certain age? I mean, the whole thing is based on Fight Club, right? So it's called the Story Club, and there is the soap is one of the big things. If you look at Fight Club, for anyone who doesn't know what Fight Club is, I don't want to be your friend, but the Fight Club poster, I'm not for sure it was the main poster because Brad Pitt was in the movie, so surely they put Brad Pitt on the poster. But one of the posters of Fight Club was that soap, and it said Fight Club on the soap. So with my very poor AI skills, I just uploaded that picture and said change the wording to story club, and that soap was the best thing. The soap you see on my newsletter is the best thing I could do. I was trying to get a picture of Brad Pitt without a shirt on and change his face for mine, and somehow I ended up looking Indian. I was like, okay, well, this is not going to work. And I actually did manage to get a picture, an AI picture of Brad Pitt or someone who looked a lot like Brad Pitt without a shirt on in the basement. That is one of the famous images from the movie, with a whole bunch of shirtless guys behind him. But he's reading a book instead of just having his hands bloody from fighting. But I don't use that image much because every time I post it on LinkedIn doesn't like bare-chested men, so the algorithm kills it, which is why I pretty much only use the soap when I use an image for the newsletter. But I think this is something. I'm assuming this is a common branding tactic, which is you use something else that is famous and you just change it enough so that you can still get the points for, oh, that's a Fight Club thing. Oh, no, but it's not Fight Club, it's Story Club. Oh, wow. So you're sort of borrowing branding from someone. And I think that's probably illegal in some circumstances. But when it comes for a newsletter, I don't think anybody's going to come after me for a copyright infringement.
So I think that is a very strong tool that a lot of bigger brands and even upcoming brands, they link to well-known names. Even say, for example, if you follow cereal, it's a UK cereal brand, and some of their ads were, okay, Barbara Streisand loves our cereal, but then like they have the little asterisks, and Barbara Streisand is a grocer on the corner, right? And the thing is, linking it to that name promotes the image. It's a great tool. It just, you need to be mindful of who you're using, what you're using. A few days ago, I saw Wolverine and Deadpool. So Heineken got together and used the adamantium from Wolverine's claws to make the can. And it's like they're associating those good vibes from that dynamic and bringing that in to Heineken.
It says something about how much of a superhero nerd I am. That as soon as you said that, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that can is not indestructible, so they cannot have used actual adamantium. These are the concerns that keep me up at night.
Let's send them an email going, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to make sure. It's
I mean, if they actually had adamantium, this would be a scientific breakthrough of gigantic proportions. But yes, maybe not to be used for beer. I'm like, but then how do you crush the can after you drank it? Like, this is a real ecological problem. For anyone not having a clue what I'm talking about, adamantium is meant to be indestructible, which is why Wolverine. Anyway, we don't need to go into it. You'll be watching the movie soon, I'm sure.
I mean, then you'd have to like watch from the very beginning, like, why Wolverine is Wolverine, and maybe we're too geeks here. But in terms of standing out and shaking things up, because there's a lot of other people doing similar things to you. How have you found that, like the process of really standing out as you have done with those different elements?
So I find it difficult to judge how much I'm standing out compared to other people, because I'm on my own. My own posts are the main thing I see on LinkedIn all the time, because that's how I interact with LinkedIn. Uh, but I find that there are a lot of people that are sort of in the storytelling space, and there's lots of different ways you can talk about it. There's lots of different ways you can come at it, or different uses you can put to it. But I've tended to find that some people just don't have anything that resembles branding. So there's nothing particularly unique about their image on the platform. There's nothing particularly unique with their headline. It's just, something that has to do with storytelling or whatever. They don't necessarily have that clear a style. To me, the most problematic thing for most storytelling people, at least on LinkedIn, is most of them don't tell stories, which to me seems, a contradiction in terms. And again, it depends on what you use storytelling for. But if your whole argument is storytelling is a way to stand out and be more engaging and more memorable, it just baffles me why you just wouldn't tell stories as a very substantial part of your content. It doesn't need to be every post, but you post 5-6 times and not one of them is a story. That to me makes no sense. And then people just end up blending in, because not many people tell stories on LinkedIn. A lot of people talk about storytelling. Very few people actually tell stories. And I look for those people. I want to know who they are. A lot of them I invite to my podcast, but it's not common that if I spend 20-30 minutes on LinkedIn on any given day, I'm going to find more than one or two stories. I'm not even talking about good stories, but just like a story in the shape of a story, not some fancy copywriting approach. Does that matter too much? It depends on what they're trying to do. When it comes to being memorable, for example, as a speaker, I have seen lots and lots of storytelling speakers' websites, And most of them, you could just swap around the things they're saying, what their branding looks like, if there is even any branding there. Like you get the same quotes as everybody, you're making the same points as everybody. Is that what makes someone successful or not? It might not be, but I know for a fact that when I had very little to show for as a speaker or a trainer on storytelling, I was getting gigs that arguably, based on my experience at least, not on my knowledge, I would say, I had no business getting, right? Like I was working for companies that perhaps had no business hiring me based on how long I had been doing that for. And they were hiring me. Why? Because everything in my website and everything that they found of me gave them the impression that I knew what I was talking about, right? Like it looked professional, it looked appealing. There was a particular style to what I was doing. So I had decent personal branding, even though there was very little to show for. It's like, how many clients had I worked at that time? Four, five. How many of them were impressive? Maybe none at that point, right? But whenever they looked at my stuff, they're like, okay, this looks like someone who knows what they're doing. And I think that this is particularly important for people before they've done anything that impressive, and after they've gotten very good at something or good enough that they are playing at a different ball game, playing a different ball game. That is then becomes important just to justify their fees. Can't be charging five figures for almost anything if people look at it and it looks like a you put together a website on Squarespace, and you never paid an expert to put together your branding, right? It just gives the wrong impression, and you can be amazing, but it just gives out the wrong impression. Now, do you need to pay an expert? Maybe not, right? But when I had no money, I got someone better than me to do the website. I got someone way better than me to do my visual branding. I never actually hired a copywriter, for example, because I was decent enough at that. But if it was just up to what I could have done, it would have just looked like what it was, which was a pretty shoddy operation ran out of the back of my girl's bedroom.
But I think I need to push back on that. A lot of people do have, they spend on brands, but the thing is, they make it look like, say, for example, the other storyteller down the road, or the other speaker, the other public speaker. It's like same clean, modern vibe, like the same kind of. They're at the base, they're trying the same thing. It looks clean, but it doesn't really stand out. It doesn't really pop.
Well, we're not disagreeing there. It's just that what they've paid for wasn't someone to help them build a brand, or the visual representation of their brand. They paid someone to have a professional looking website, which are different things. You can take professional looking pictures, you can have a professional looking website, but none of that is a brand. For example, if you take my pictures, right? It took me quite a while to figure out what I should be wearing on them, but arguably that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that in all of the pictures I think that I've used on a website, I'm I'm like super happy and smiling in all of them. Like the pictures weren't working, and then I started talking nonsense to the photographer and smiling a lot more, and just like, let me just take some pictures while we're having this conversation because I think they'll come out better. And all of the pictures that I ended up using are me clearly having a good time doing something. Either that or I'm a very good model. I'm not. I was genuinely talking nonsense and laughing and going like, come on, what do you want? Do you want me to just talk shit and you take pictures? And those are the pictures she was taking. So there was a clear decision at some point to go, okay, I'm going to use these types of pictures. It's this type of imagery. Is this type of like, do I want to sound super professional? Do I want to sound like I can have a bit of fun? So there was some effort to define what the brand was, and I think I somehow stumbled upon something that worked without very having no understanding of branding. But I think what a lot of people do is they never think about that stuff. They're like, I want to talk about this thing. I need a website that looks professionally made, which is fine, but that's not a brand, as I'm sure you've said a million times.
That's the thing. Like what you mentioned in terms of the photograph, I've had that experience with clients that they'd post up posed smiling pictures, and then I tell them like, look, there's no energy, there's no you in that. Like, yes, there's a picture of you, but the moment they change it, and they're like, a friend of them takes a photo where they're like at their full energy, it's a completely different vibe. And it always makes me question, it's like, maybe that age of professional, quotation marks, is, it's not really a thing. It's not really considered as attractive.
Was it ever attractive though? Because I've got two small girls, and both of them have very compelling smiles when they're actually smiling. But then you ask them to take a picture, and my oldest was now 7. It's like, okay, Alicia, can you just look at the camera and smile and stuff? And she goes like this, which is just like, it's, it's not her best smile, right? And if anyone is just listening to this, I just made a little stupid heart with my hands and smiled in the artificial way most children smile. It's hard to smile in a way that looks genuine, which is why people say, like, say cheese and stuff, and that kind of works, but it's difficult. Like, you can say cheese and the some parts of your face are doing the right thing, but it's very different than when you're really smiling or really laughing, which is why whenever I get, I'm doing, like, I'm getting a thumbnail for a video, I just scroll until a moment where me and the guest are smiling, and it's very different when someone really is smiling, because the eyes, there's the eyes get crinkly, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens to the face. And if you've done podcasts for a while, you probably noticed that we sound different when we smile. Like, if I'm talking like this, I sound very different with a smile on my face, which is what I have now, than if I'm talking like this. It's not obvious if you're not paying attention, if you not don't know what you're looking for, but once you've heard it or seen it, you notice the difference. And this is what I think happens as well with photographs. Someone, like, unless you're really good at posing, it's very difficult to smile at a picture and look authentic, and for that smile to look as compelling as a real smile would, than if you just caught without posing. Which is why I hate posed pictures, and which is why whenever somebody takes a posed picture of me, I go like this. I make some sort of silly face, because I think it's just ridiculous to keep trying to look at good looking in pictures. It's just too artificial.
Oh my God, I could not agree more. I actually have a rule with my friends, and the rule is silly photos only. A lot of the time, they'll be like, "Oh, let's get the waiter to take a photo," and I'm like, "No. They will just be like posed, and we'll look like a bunch of gangsters." I don't know if this like says more about the friends that I hang out with, but it looks so much worse than saying, "Hey, let's take a wefie, a group like selfie," and silly photos only. Like, you're far more natural, you're far more like relaxed, and that pops so much more. Say like, "Hey, I'm so boring," etc. But if you say, yeah, how you hang out with your friends, pretty sure they're not going to say, "Oh, they're boring." Right? There's always that element.
I got tired of trying to have the battle of, can we not have the posed photograph? So I just, I'm fighting that battle on my own, right? Like, sure, we'll take a picture. I'm gonna make the faces that I normally make, to the extent that people say, that my friends will say, "Oh, that's the Francisco face." And one day, for some reason, I took a photo with a friend and I smiled, and she's like, you can smile at pictures? Like, is that a thing? And it's a nice smile. I was like, of course I can. I'm not a moron. I choose not to smile at pictures. Like, I don't have some sort of, I'm not Chandler Bing or something, right? Or a 7-year old. Your face completely loses its ability to look natural. I just think it's ridiculous. But when I was in London in my youth, my friends and I had all watched that movie Zoolander with Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson, and there's the bit where look the Zoolander face was this like really forced modeling face where they kind of just go like this. So we used to shout like somebody would take a picture and then someone would shout "Blue Steel," which was like the brand in the movie, and then everybody would just look at the camera and go like and just do a pouty, really forced face. So a lot of the pictures I have from that time, the ones I kept, are all the Blue Steel pictures, where there's like 10 of us and everybody's posing like the most ridiculous model face they can pull off. And they were great because nobody was trying to look good. And I think when it comes to image or brand or whatever we want to call it, when it comes to things like social media, one thing you do notice is when somebody makes a video, like, does it look like that's who they would be if you were having a drink with them or whatever, a coffee, or you're out for a chat? Or does it look like some sort of character they're trying to create where it's more professional or whatever? And I think when you being just the person you would normally be with your friends, you just happen to be talking about something that is, professional to some degree, that is more attractive than almost anything else. And to most people, where's that line from? This is a speaker called Sally Hogshead. It's like, you don't need to change who you are, you need to be more of who you are. Oh, yeah, this is one she uses, and the other one that is really good is, it's good to be better, but it's better to be different, right? Or different is better than better, right? Because like, you're not going to win at the better fight. There's a lot of, you're not going to be the greatest at anything or the best of pretty much anything, but you can be different, right? So that's why different is better than better. And I think that's a lot of people just need to find, being who they are is almost certainly different than almost anybody else, and they just have to find the way to do that while they talk about the things they talk about. And once you do that, you come across natural, you come across authentic. That word that I hate, most people hate these days. um, but that is more compelling than almost anything else you can do artificially, because you're not a good actor, right? You're not going to pull off the artificial thing the way you might pull off being who you actually are.
I think that's a lot of just don't overthink it. Just be who you are naturally. And before we go, I've got one question that I ask everyone, and that is, what's the biggest societal norm that you want to push back on and teach others about?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I really want to convince other people to do what I do. But the one thing I do on a regular basis is is to actually say the thing. There's a lot of topics of conversation, particularly, sometimes I say intimate stuff. I don't necessarily mean bedroom stuff, although I have no problem talking about that. But it's just there's just stuff that people don't normally talk about. Like, for example, people in relationships who often never talk about the stuff going on in their relationships. Everything becomes like a conversation you only have at home, if you have it at home, or with your best friend. And the vast majority of this stuff is, one, not that important, two, stuff other people go through as well, and more importantly to me, funny. So if there's anything going on between my wife and I would just talk about it in front of all of our friends, and she'll usually be horrified for 2 seconds, and then she'll have a laugh about it. And I just find when you're forcing yourself to talk about it, you're not like harboring some resentment against your partner or your friends. And the other thing is, most people will have the same problems or have gone through the same things, and it just becomes a much more interesting conversation to have with everyone than if everybody's just having small talk, just doing small talk with other people, and never actually talking about the stuff that matters. Because if you don't talk about stuff that kind of matters, it's almost certain you're not going to talk about the stuff that does matter. I just say the thing more often than not. And sometimes that's a bit socially awkward. But after a while, you get a reputation for being someone who has no social tact, supposedly. But it's not like I don't know that some of this stuff is probably not to be talked about in polite company. I just choose to ignore that rule because I think it's funny, and if it's funny, I'm willing to do it. So that's one of the things. Is I think if people just talked about stuff that kind of matters, even if it might be considered impolite or sensitive or whatever, then there's more things we talk about, and having actually talking about more things, I think it's more likely to be um, healthy and entertaining and make for better relationships than if we just don't.
Love that so much. Thank you. And thank you for joining on the show, Francisco. You can connect with Francisco through his deets in the podcast show notes. And thank you for listening to the Art of Branding podcast. Dropping a 5-star review is a badass way to show support for the podcast so more people can discover how to create their own badass brand. Become badass, you need to dig deep. Let's shift your business and voice from just another in the industry to the obvious one. Visit badassstorybyb.com to get started.
You can smile at pictures? Like, is that a thing? And it's a nice smile. I was like, of course I can. I'm not a moron. I choose not to smile at pictures. I don't have some sort of, I'm not Chandler Bing or something, right? Or a 7-year-old, your face completely loses its ability to look natural. I just think it's ridiculous.